All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thomas Montgomery. It's good to be with you this Friday morning. Today is Friday, July 19th, 2024. We get together most weekday mornings at this time to talk about strategies, tips, techniques, share success stories, and support each of you. We have a big announcement that'll be coming out Monday. So I'll just plant that seed and we'll roll it out on Monday, but it's a significant announcement. But separate from that, let's talk today, as is shown on the screen. My screen should be shared with you. And I was having a conversation with one of our distribution partners this morning, and it dawned on me that maybe we're not all clear on the answer to this question. And if we're not clear to the answer of what does it take to get business funding, then we're probably not going to do a good job helping others, and we may have missed expectations. So we're going to dig into this topic. So what does it take to get business funding? So again, we have business in there because personal funding is different than business funding. In general, personal funding is easier, isn't it? In general, if you have two things in general, good credit and good income, good documented income, you can get personal loans. What's the problem with that? If that cuts through to the chase, makes it simpler, then why don't we just go get personal funding instead of business funding? Well, business funding is far superior because we can separate the liability. So our business has obligations that we don't personally. Our business obligations shouldn't report on our personal credit. And maybe most importantly, businesses can get a lot more funding than individuals can. So, of course, you and I, we focus on business funding. But let's go back to this question. And the reason I have the backdrop here, yesterday we went through and talked about the startup business funding package. And I don't want to waste your time and rehash that. But obviously, the bullets here identify what's included in the funding package. And when I had a conversation with Phyllis this morning, it dawned on me we needed to go back and revisit this. So let's start with this question. So it's very, very, very important that you understand that there is, and I'll type here, there is not a single answer to that question. Because business funding can come in all different shapes and sizes. There's different lenders, there's different loan programs. So there's lots and lots of places to get business funding. And in general, the requirements could vary from one to the other. So it's very important to understand that there's not just one set answer. And so when we bring on new distribution partners, they'll often ask questions, and I can tell that they have some element of financial illiteracy because they don't understand that there's not one answer. So what would be an example of a bad question? Well, what's my interest rate going to be for my client? Or if they're asking for myself, we don't know that, right? We're going to have to get the client involved. We're going to have to build out their package. Then we do the lender match in our system that matches the client to the best type of capital based upon the client's mitigating circumstances. And then we apply, and then the lender answers that. Because you and I are not lenders. We're not plain bankers, are we? We're technical advisors, or simply put, you're an affiliate. So we first of all have to be very clear that there's not a single answer to that question. However, now let's put this in capital letters. However, there are certain elements that are commonly needed for business funding. So that's what we're going to talk about. But we need to clarify that. Let's take merchant cash advances, which we don't do, which we don't necessarily like, but let's just look at it. MCA, for example. And I know it has negative impressions by most people, but let's just look at it because it is a type of business funding. So Merchant cash advance. Do they care about the owner's credit? No. Do they care about the business credit of the business itself? No. It is underwritten specifically off of the cash flow. It's essentially an advancement of expected future cash flow. That's an extreme example, not what you and I do, but that just reiterates the point. So we're going to go through and talk about what's commonly needed. Now, if a client doesn't have one of these elements, are we like, do we throw our hands up and say, oh shit, this isn't going to work? No, we need to make one of two decisions, don't we? We either fix that if the client doesn't have it, or we move to a type of funding or type of specific lender that doesn't require. Make sense? All right, so let's go ahead and go through a list. Now, some of you are familiar with our training. So I'm on chapmanloanprogram.org. I'm going to scroll down under resources, and we have a 10 mistake training. That's really good. That's really good. That a lot of you, well, I shouldn't say a lot of you, some of you are out teaching in person or online. This is a really good presentation, which I'm going to give you a synopsis of right now, but there's a longer description here on chapmanloanprogram.org under About Us and Resources that you can see. But we're going to have just a conversation amongst ourselves. So let's start with business plan. Does every lender require a business plan? Yes or no? Go ahead and type into the Q&A the question and answer. It's like a chat box of Zoom. I want your input now. We have 425 of you on, which is great. Is it yes or no? Does every lender require a business plan? Go ahead and type in yes or no. Because if it's yes, then we're going to need a business plan. If it's no, we may or may not. Well, and that was a trick question. I caught Toby, so I apologize. Toby says definitely yes. The answer is no, because we've already said there's not a single answer to every question. There's a number of loan programs that do not require a business plan. There are some that require a one-page business plan. There are some that require a full detailed business plan. So I tricked Toby, and I'm sorry for that now to have done that to you. But there's never a single answer to the question. But in general, a business plan is really nice to have. So every one of you who are affiliates, every time you refer a client to your landing page and they come through and they become a client, a participant, one of the things that we do for them for free is to develop a business plan. Now, I'm not trying to take some academic high level, oh, isn't it great to have a business plan? Sure it is. But my point more specifically is the business plan has some incredibly important information that's needed. And one of those is called the use of funds. So that details how much money does that client want to borrow or to get, and what are they going to use it for? Well, why do we need to know that? That makes an incredible difference in where we go for funding. What if they want 10 million to buy an apartment building? What if they want 1 million to buy an existing business? What if they want 100,000 of working capital? Three very different amounts, three different scenarios, three different uses of funding. So a business plan is important. What that business plan needs to entail could vary. And again, one of our most active lenders we work with, they require a one-page business plan. They won't accept anything more than one page. So the type of business plan is variable. Not all lenders do require a business plan, but here we're going through normally what's needed. But it's okay. We're going to provide your client. We're going to ask them, when you have someone come to your landing page, they fill it out, they enroll, we get started. We're going to ask them in the first implementation call, do you have a business plan? If so, share it with us. If not, let us take a look at creating you one. Or if you have one, let's look at it and see if it needs tweaking. I can't tell you how often we have clients that come to us and they really don't know what they want money for. They haven't thought through it. They'll either say as much as you can get me, or they'll just pull some number out of their orifice. And it's like, it shouldn't work that way, right? We need to have a list. Like if you and I were going to go to the grocery store today, how much money do we need to check out at the register? It depends upon what we put in our shopping cart. How much funding we need is dependent upon what we need the money for. So is it always required? No, because we have a rule. So let's make this rule number one. Each lender has their own underwriting criteria. So there's not a single answer, but in general, what's commonly a business plan. But that's okay. We're going to help them with that. Okay. What are other things that are really important to have? Not necessarily always required, but in general, they are. So let's scroll up, because as we talked about yesterday, the startup business funding package was literally designed to capture what's typically needed. So what's the separate from getting the client some working capital? What's the next bullet? A unique address. So let's go back. So a unique business address. Now, one of the things I really like about our morning Zooms is we don't just talk about the what, we talk about the why. Why is it important? And that's what smart people want to know. Smart people want to know not only the answer to the question, but why is that the case? So why would a unique business address be important? If we were to go survey a bunch of people, they would say, well, it looks better, it sounds better, it makes you look more professional, and that's fine. But there's a much more specific reason, a very specific reason. And I'll give you an analogy first, and then I'll give you the direct answer. If you go buy a home, is there a mortgage placed against the home that if you don't pay the mortgage, that the lender can foreclose on it? Yes. If you go buy a car on financing, is there a lien against the car title whereby if you don't pay the loan back, they can come repossess the car? Yes. For business loans, especially larger business loans, they're typically going to put a lien on the business. So if the borrower doesn't repay the loan, that the lender has access to the borrowers, in this case, the business's assets. Now, maybe you get all worked up about that, but you shouldn't. It's normal. It doesn't affect the business's normal operation, but it just means that if the business doesn't repay, the lender has first right of access to the assets of the business. Kind of makes sense, right? Because they've loaned a lot of money to the business, and if the business doesn't repay it, they need to have some way to mitigate the risk. So let's carry this out. So there has to be a true address for that lien to be able to be set up. And we've seen so many clients that didn't want to follow the guidance, didn't want to follow the rules, and they get to the end and everything else they're approved for, but they get declined because of this. Because when it comes time, they're going to ask for a copy of, in most cases now, used to not be, but now in most cases, the lender is going to ask for a copy of the lease if you don't own your own building where your business is based. They want a copy of the lease. And so that's what we provide, is the business address and then the documentation, including the lease, because they're going to put a lien against the assets of the business. So think of it very visually. Have you ever walked through the local shopping mall that's near your house? And have you ever seen a store that's closed, that used to be open, but it's closed? It's not in business anymore, and there's a lock on the front door? That's because typically the landlord had a lien. And so when that business stopped paying their rent, the landlord had legal rights to go put a lock on that door. And now everything in that rental property is now pledged to repay the mall owner. the property manager for the unpaid rent. So just think of it that way. We need to provide, in most cases, a unique business address with a signed, executed, valid lease to be able to satisfy the lenders. So that's the why. And I think some of you don't realize that. So some of you push back and say, well, they work from home. It's fine. It's a home-based business. No one cares where the workers or the owners work from. They could work from a yacht, from the beach, from their home in their underwear, pajamas. It doesn't matter. But there needs to be a real business address. And guess what? We provide that, and we provide that for free. Okay, so are there other things that are commonly needed? Well, we need to have an entity. So if you don't have an entity, so we have a bunch of you on here, we have Bill McClure. So let's say that Bill McClure wants to start a business, but he doesn't want to form an entity. He just wants to operate it as himself. That's called a sole proprietorship. Is that okay? Sure. There's many advantages to having a business, from a liability and professionalism and so forth. But yeah, any of us could just go out and start using our name and start a lawn care business or daycare business or whatever. It's called a sole proprietorship. But if we have a true entity like a LLC or S Corp or C Corp, so forth, then we have more borrowing capacity. So that's another element that is not always needed, because remember, there's not a single answer. There's exceptions, but in general, these are the things that are needed to get a large amount of business funding. A business plan with a clear use of funds, a unique business address, and an entity. But guess what? We provide the entity. We pay for it through the grant. All right, so let's move on here. Is there anything else, or is that pretty much it? If I have a business plan and a good address and I've filed my entity, am I ready to go to funding? Probably not. Once we have an address and I missed a number. Once we have an address and an entity, then we need to get the EIN and open a bank account. That really creates the foundation of a fundable business once we're at this point. And guess what? That's included with the startup program. Okay, so let me make it more interactive now. What is something else that any of you can think of that's typically needed for a business to be fundable? What else can you think of that might be needed? Usually, there could be exceptions. Go ahead and type it into the Q&A. We'll give you a moment. But we do know if we don't have these elements, we're certainly not optimized for funding. Phyllis brings up a good point. She says collateral. Okay. Well, let's go back up. Oh, no, I guess we'll go down here a little bit. And we've talked many times about what's called the 3 C's. Credit, talking about business credit. Collateral, which Phyllis just mentioned. And then capacity, which means cash flow. So Phyllis is right. So in general, lenders are going to want to see the 3 C's. That we have business credit worthiness, which we haven't gotten to yet, but that is actually a bullet. They're going to typically want to see that we have collateral, which is what Phyllis said. So what is collateral? It's something to pledge. So if the loan goes bad, that it mitigates the risk of the lender. Makes sense. Now, on real small loans, collateral is less relevant. But if we get to bigger, mid-size and bigger loans, then that's usually a requirement. So we realize that most small businesses don't have collateral. Guess what? We provide it. It's another bullet. So now all of a sudden, these bullets that we went through yesterday hopefully are helping you. I didn't need that. Most of you are helping you understand why they're there, why we applied for this grant, why we received the grant, and why this program is so valuable, because we're providing what's needed generally to get funding. And then credit, we just mentioned, but we're talking about business credit, right? We're talking about, has the business shown that it's a responsible borrower? Has the business had access to credit, and has it paid properly? Well, that's one of the things we do again here. We actually add trade lines. So there's others, and I encourage you that when you have a chance, you can go, sorry, it went down too far, watch the 10 mistakes. But these are the main ones that I wanted to bring to your attention, those elements that's typically needed. I don't know if it's amusing or disappointing, but here's my world. In my world, I'll frequently have clients that say, well, I'm ready to go to funding. I need to go to funding. I have one gentleman, his name's Josh, great guy. He owns a Lamborghini as well as I do. But Josh, he's the first one to say each phone call, I'm ready to go to funding, man. I'm ready. I'm ready. And I'm like, wait. Is your business fundable? Because according to my records, we're not fundable yet. And if you ask people, is your business fundable? Usually they'll say, oh, yeah. But here's a quick checklist that we could use. And so I'm not saying it's only these items, and it can vary by lender. But if we don't have a business plan, then we probably haven't vetted through really what we need the money for and nailed down the right amount. We don't have a unique business address. We know that that's a problem. If we don't have an entity that's in good standing, we know that's a problem. If we don't have an EIN and an open bank account, we know that that's a problem. And in most cases, if we don't have collateral and business credit. But that's exactly why we applied for this grant, because you see the checklist, it matches. We pull this down a little bit. It essentially matches. So with that, let me open it up to questions, comments, concerns that any of you have. Most of you are our existing distribution partners. Some of you are considering becoming one, which is great. Many of you are also clients or considering to become clients. So what we do is we work through figuring out what your starting point is, and then navigate to get from the starting point to the finish line. And the finish line means we have a fundable business. We want you to become funded, right? That's the goal. I know. Most people don't want the process. Most people don't. It's so much easier just to ignore all of this and think, let's just skip all of this. But what you're saying when you say, let's skip all of this, is essentially you're saying, hey, I just want personal loans. I don't really want a business loan, because this is the bread and butter. Now, there can be other requirements based on different lenders, but we're just talking about the most common items needed. And that's really what we're focused on, is if we can address what's typically needed, if we need to make any tweaks or adjustments from there, we can. So a client signs up, we find out where they're at. All right, so Todd brought up a point which I didn't list, and Todd's point is longevity, how long the business has been open. So is it good to have a business that's been around for 30 years versus a business that's been around 3 days? Yeah. Assuming that during that time, the business ran profitably, assuming during that time, the business filed tax returns. So just because a business is, we'll call it aged, doesn't automatically make it better. But all other things being equal, sure, a business that's been around, that's been profitable for 4 years is better than a business that's not been profitable for 4 years. But it's absolutely a mistake to think that startup new businesses can't get funded. So new businesses can get funding. Sometimes what will happen is you'll talk to people or hear people say things that may be true with one lender, but not true with all lenders. So for example, did you know that the SBA does not require you to have an entity? A sole proprietorship can get an SBA loan. Now, could you have been told different? Sure. Is it accurate? No. But maybe that's what someone told you. And some banks, because remember, the SBA is not the lender. SBA is the guarantor. So if the bank that you're going through requires that, then you could falsely think, oh, the SBA requires that. No, the SBA is fine to loan a sole proprietorship. But in general, sure, it's better to have a true entity. Back to Todd's point, is it required that you be in business a certain amount of time before you get funding? No, but there's not a single answer to that question. So sure, Todd could be right sometimes. There are some lenders that have minimums, but there are also some lenders that don't have minimums. So we've got to all agree to rule number one. Different lenders have different loan programs, and different loan programs have different underwriting criteria. And no, we're not going to be locked out of funding because of age of the business. That will not keep us from being funded. But in general, these are the items that we need to certainly have as a core group of fundability elements. And guess what? We have a program and a grant to provide that. All right, so who else has questions on, this is kind of part two. So yesterday we introduced or reintroduced the startup business funding package. So if you're not familiar with it, you can go to chapmanloanprogram.org, and there's even a training video here. To participate in the startup program, it's a two-step process, step one, step two. But today, it isn't to promote the startup business funding package. It's more to come back to what some of the questions or concerns that I was getting from individuals, which was related to what's needed. What's needed, there's not one answer. We've said that several times. But in general, what's needed are these items. And guess what? That's what we provide. All right, so Karen asked if this is grant subsidized. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. So the startup business funding package is, we received grant funding to be able to provide each participant, and I can go back, I guess, to the screenshot here, which it doesn't really fit into any of the bullets, but just because Karen was asking. So the startup business funding package is grant subsidized. So what does that mean specifically to meet Karen's needs? So everyone gets the $2,500 allocation up front, and everyone gets the $10,000 quick cash. So there's the answer to Karen's question. All right, if anyone needs to reach out to us, here's our phone number. You're welcome to call us. Here's our email. You're welcome to email us. If you're looking for a funding proposal, it's fundingproposal.org. If you're looking to become an affiliate, it's makingmillionaires.org. And I think that covers it for today. Anything else we need to cover before we dismiss? All right, Jeff's asking if we can do a quick recap. So that's good advice, Jeff. Thank you. So today we talked about what does it take to get business funding, not personal funding, but business funding. The first myth that we dispelled is there's not a single answer to that question. It depends. And that's why our program is so important. We bring clients in where they're at, we evaluate their starting point, and we help them get to the finish line, which means business funding. But the type of funding will vary based upon a client's mitigating circumstances. There is kind of a core list of commonly needed elements, and those are listed 1 through 6. The great news is if clients have it, great, that allows us to move forward even quicker. And if they don't have the core elements, we have a real efficient way to fix it. Furthermore, financial literacy is a big deal, and we have a big announcement coming out Monday. But with that, any of you that want a deeper dive into the topic can go to chapmanloanprogram.org and come right down here and watch this training video. And that'll give you a deeper understanding of what does it take to qualify for funding, deeper than what we covered today. If you're willing to go out and teach this and educate on this, we'd love to work with you, and that ties into our financial literacy announcement coming up on Monday. All right, well, thanks everyone. You have a great day, and we will talk to you Monday morning. Have a great day and a nice weekend. Thanks, bye.